Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On, and I'm your host Tom DeAmber. As always, we are very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to join us. Today we thought we would do a litmus test, if you would, on what type of society are we actually being ruled and or governed by. And how I thought would be a good idea to do this is to compare the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto versus the 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. Now, obviously, we are supposed to be guided and living under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that we know as the 10 Amendments. But in 1848, two gentlemen by the name of Engels and Marx, Frederick Engels and Karl Marx, they were financed by banking interests out of London, particularly the Rothschild interest, to come up with a manifesto basically on how to rule people through force of government, but also through deception. And what they wanted to do here is, again, they wanted to have mandates upon the people, but they wanted to set things up so that the people would think this was for the betterment of society. We do have a picture here of Karl Marx. And this is in his Sunday best, for lack of a better word. When you study Karl Marx, you will find some very interesting things about him. One was that he did not take care of his children whatsoever. As a matter of fact, one of his children died on mysterious and never solved reasons. The other thing was that you find that his hygiene was deplorable. When you read comments about everybody who had to deal with Karl Marx and met him in person and so forth, everybody had a hard time with him because his hygiene was just deplorable. But again, he was financed by Rothschild interest, banking interest out of London, and him and Engels to draw up this manifesto. And what I thought we would do was take the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto and again the Bill of Rights and do a litmus test to say, okay, this was set up as a system to monopolize government power, and the other being set up as a system of free will of the people. And let's merge these together, put them through the sifter, and see what we come out with. So, with that being said and done, let's just do a quick review of the what is supposed to be the supreme law of our land? What are we supposed to be guided by? And I thought that this would be very interesting for everybody. But obviously the supreme law of the land, as we know, is supposed to be the Constitution of the United States. So I just thought I would read something to you from the 16th American Jurisprudence, 2nd edition, section 256. I ask you to go look this up, but it's going to explain to you quite well and in defined language who and what we are supposed to be under. The general misconception is that any statute passed by legislators bearing the appearance of law constitutes the law of the land. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any statute, to be valid, must be in agreement with it. It is impossible for both the Constitution and a law violating it to be valid. One must prevail. This is stated as follows. The general rule is that an unconstitutional statute, though having the form and name of law, is in reality no law, but is wholly void and ineffective for any purpose, since unconstitutionality dates from the time of its enactment and not merely from the date of the decision so branding it. An unconstitutional law in legal contemplation is inoperative as it had never been passed. Such a statute leaves the question that it purports to settle, just as it would be and had the statute not been enacted. Since an unconstitutional law is void, the general principles follow that it imposes no duties, confers no rights, creates no office, bestows no power or authority on anyone, affords no protection, and justifies no acts performed under it. A void act cannot be legally consistent with a valid one. An unconstitutional law cannot operate to supersede an existing valid law. Indeed, insofar as a statute runs counter to the fundamental law of the land, it is superseded thereby. No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law, and no courts are bound to enforce it. 16th American Jurisprudence, 2nd edition, section 256. And let's continue with this. Excuse me. The general misconception is that any statute passed by legislators bearing the appearance of the law constitutes the law of the land. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any statute to be valid must be in agreement with it. All laws which are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. Marbury versus Madison, 5 U.S. 137. This was a court case, folks, in 1803. So you can go to the 5 U.S. Section 137, and you can read that for yourself. Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rule making or legislation which would abrogate them. Miranda versus Arizona, 384 U.S. Section 436, page 491. Folks, this was the famous case in Arizona that you know as the Miranda rights, where they have to read the rights to you. That is the case that it came out of. An unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties, affords no protection. It creates no office. It is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed. Norton versus Shelby County, 118 U.S. 425, page 442. This other one that I'm about to read you, we read the full section through the 16th American Jurisprudence, but I feel it's important enough to read again. The general rule is that an unconstitutional statute, though having the form and name of law, is in reality no law, but it is wholly void and ineffective for any purpose, since an unconstitutionality dates back from the time of its enactment and not merely from the date of the decision so branding it. No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law, and no courts are bound to enforce it. And again, folks, that was 16 American Jurisprudence, 2nd edition, section 256. So, I think from them 5 court cases, when we went back into the 1700s, 1800s, and the 1900s, that we can see, folks, exactly what type of law we are supposed to be under and who is at the apex of that law. Okay, obviously it's the United States Constitution that our government is supposed to be regulating itself, not us, itself under. And if you do remember that the federal government was supposed to be involved in territories, enclaves, and districts only, and not into the business of the 50 states. So, like I said, let's take this 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto up against the 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights from the U.S. Constitution. And instead of using this as a format, as Marx did to regulate people, let's use this as a litmus test as to what system we think we're living under. And folks, I can't answer the questions for you. We are merely going to be presenting evidence to you. You have to come up with a determination through your own experience in life and your daily activities, who you're paying, who you're not paying, who you're answering to, and who you're not answering to, which system we are under. So, Karl Marx describes in his Communist Manifesto the 10 steps necessary to destroy a free enterprising system and replace it with a system of omnipotent government power, so as to effect a communist social state. These 10 steps are known as the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Again, this was written by Frederick Engels and Karl Marx in 1848 with financing through the Rothschilds' banking interest out of London. The following brief presents the original 10 planks with the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx in 1848. And folks, again, he says that his reason for doing this was to create a system of omnipotent government power, centralized, unanswerable government power, which obviously the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto does, and obviously the 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights does the opposite. It limits the powers of a centralized government, okay? So we have to ask ourselves which plank or which system are we living under. So with that in mind, I'd like to go ahead real briefly and just read the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, and then we're going to read the 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights, and then we're going to break them down so we can analytically look at these systems and see which system affects us the most. The first plank of the Communist Manifesto was the abolition of private property and the application of all rents of land to public purposes. The second plank, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. The third plank, abolition of all rights of inheritance. The fourth, confiscation of all property of all immigrants and or rebels. The fifth, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with the state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Number 6, centralization of the means of communications and transportations in the hands of the state. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Number 8, equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country and national lines by a more equitable distribution of population over the country. Number 10, free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factories labor laws in its present form, and combination of education with industrial production. Okay, so there are the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, and now I thought it would be interesting, and if we would just take the quick time here to go ahead and let's read the 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. They have a quick summary here of the manifesto, and I'll do that quick with you here. Again, number 1 was the abolition of private property. Number 2, a heavy progressive income tax. Number 3, abolition of all rights of inheritance. Number 4, confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels. Number 5, a centralized bank. Number 6, government control of communication and transportation. Number 7, government ownership of factories and agriculture. Number 8, government control of labor. Number 9, corporate farms, regional planning. And number 10, government control of education. So, with that being said, let's go to our 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. In Article 1 of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. Article 1, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Article 2, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Article 3, no soldier shall in times of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Article 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure shall not be violated, and no warrants shall be issued, but upon probable cause, supported by the oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. No person shall be held to answer for a capital, Article 5, no person shall be held to be answered for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of liberty, of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Article 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district within what the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusations, to be confronted with the witness against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Article 7. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Article 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. Article 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Article 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectfully or to the people. Okay, so we have these two conflicting systems, basically is what we have. We have a system of omnipotent, centralized government power, unanswerable to the people. And then we have a government that is very limited, very described, and very concise, limited powers that are answerable to the people. So the question comes now, folks, exactly just what system are we living under? Because obviously these two systems bang heads with each other. One is in favor of a centralized government and every mechanism of the government. I'm talking, education, land, the money system itself, and the other is laissez-faire or to the people. So now we have to ask ourselves exactly what system we're under. So let's break this apart. 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto and some of their American counterparts: abolition of private property and the application of all rents of land to public purposes. Now, folks, do you remember we covered very heavily Kelo versus New London? And that was the famous case a couple of years ago, I think it was maybe 3 years ago now, where the Supreme Court ruled that the United States government, or any government under it, actually had the right and the ability to take the people's land and houses in which was Kelo. The group was a class action lawsuit, but the one representative was Kelo, versus New London. New London was the entity, the government entity that was trying to take the land, and the Supreme Court ruled that New London had every right. The corporation had every right to do what it wanted with that land, and what they wanted to do, what the city wanted to do, was to build. It was on waterfront property, and they wanted to do improvements to the land, to the buildings. Actually, they wound up taking the houses right down, and they're going to build evidently some type of entertainment there, where waterfront property, where the state will create more revenue. So with that being said, that went all the way to the Supreme Court. You have to ask yourself exactly who owns the land. Now, we got into in the show at one time how in this country we used to have a laudial title, and a laudial title meant absolute. That's what a laudial means in Latin, absolute. It was yours, you owned it. Now we find out that the Supreme Court says that the corporation that you know as the government has every right to do with what it wants to its land. The corporation owns the land, and if you think I'm wrong, go ahead and don't pay your property taxes for a couple of years, and you'll find out who owns your land. And folks, this is why your mortgage to that land is public record. You can go to any town hall or any city hall with which a person lives in and look up what you would be considered personal information: their mortgage, their payment, their term, their interest rate, because it is attached to public land. You have a certificate of title. Do you remember we went over the word certificate shows and shows ago? Literally a negotiable instrument, meaning bearer use of. Someone is allowing you to use that entity, whatever it may be. Your car, your land, whichever it may be. Your birth certificate, whatever it may be. It's a negotiable instrument holding value. So what's taking place here? Who actually owns the land? Is it the corporation you know as the government? Or do you think you own your land? Again, I can't answer that question for you, but you have to ask yourself, am I true owner of this land? Why do I record all my dealings with this land that I think I own to a public entity for public consumption? Why? You can answer that question yourself. Anyway, folks, a lot of it comes down to the 14th Amendment, which we've gone over before. But other things that take place with you think you own your land is various zoning laws that have taken place, school and property taxes. Also, folks, there is an agency called the Bureau of Land Management. And, folks, the Bureau of Land Management really are the folks that are controlling the zoning entities and so forth of the land. Because as we've gotten into before, the federal government and the states are just subsidies thereof. The federal government is an insolvent corporation. And as we have described before in language, that basically you do not own your land, that the corporation owns the land, but the corporation is an insolvent entity. So you have to answer that question, do I own the land that I sit on? And folks, think about it. You make an improvement to that land, the house, the building, whatever it may be. You have to pay them more to do it, besides your labors and your monies for the materials. Okay, number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Americans know this misapplication of the 16th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution in 1913, the Social Security Act of 1936, Joint House Resolution 192 of 1933, and various state income taxes, and we call it paying your fair share. Very interesting, paying your fair share. When you study Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto, you will actually see that basically this term fair share came up from the Communist Manifesto. That was all part of getting the people, again, we're not going to do it with the barrel of a gun no more. We're going to make you desire this. Folks, believe it or not, when you fill out all your forms to have income taxes taken out of your paycheck, it's an application. You're doing this under your own free will. Now, if you remember the Grace Commission, we went through the Grace Committee the Grace Commission very well, where Ronald Reagan got together, formed a commission called the Grace Commission to determine where all the different money that the government was taking in, where it was going, how it was being spent, how effectively, and so forth. And long and behold, we discovered, after reading it verbatim to you, that according to the Grace Commission, not one penny of your income taxes goes to the operations of the government. Then you may ask, well, how do we pay for the roads? You pay for the roads with what's called usage taxes, fuel usage taxes. You buy a gallon of gasoline, you buy tires, you buy a spark plug. There are taxes that are formulated into the purchase of all these entities, and basically what happens is all that money goes to the Department of Transportation for the benefit of the highways. So this is how they take care of the roads. We did discover, through further research, that all your income taxes goes to an organization called the International Monetary Fund through a private bank that you know is the Federal Reserve banking system. And we did demonstrate to you one time, when you look at the back of a check, if you send the check to the IRS, when it's stamped, the endorsement on it will say Federal Reserve Banking System. We did bring a check in that was written years ago to the IRS and showed you the back of it in black and white. It said Federal Reserve Banking System. So, again, you're paying your fair share to who? You're paying your fair share to these international bankers that are using your money to conquer the world. Literally, and then holding you liable for this, because what they say, folks, is that it goes to pay the national debt. Well, as we've demonstrated to you, that the debt is fiat. It really, we have to get permission from a private bank called the Federal Reserve to print our own money, and then we pay an interest bond due on that. So it's perpetual debt, because if every dollar every Federal Reserve note that you call a dollar is in your pocket, there's an interest bond due on that. All right? So, for example, we just gave the bankers $28 trillion with a T, and now we have to, and they gave us permission to print the money to give to them in the first place, and now we have to pay an interest bond due on them to give them the money in the first place. Think of that. It's ludicrous. Okay? So, the progressive heavy income tax did multiple things. One, it supplemented the coffers of the federal government. But number two, and more importantly, when you study what they were after, it helps divide the family, because today 56 cents of every, what you call the dollar, goes to taxes, goes to the government. So basically what takes place is that both people have to work, and out of a two-parent family unit. Basically it breaks up the family, so then who's raising the children? These daycare centers are raising the children. So the child grows up with a divided obedience, one to the outside entity, the daycare center, but two also to the mother and the father, if the mother and father exist today as one unit. 1998 was the first year in this country there were more filings for divorce than there were marriages. So it helps divide the family. It separates the family. When you study this, folks, when you get into different people that set up mechanisms to control societies, and they all mention this, including Engels and Marx and Rousseau and many others. They mention how to break up the family unit, because the family unit was the foundation. They had to break up the foundation, and that's the family unit, and that's a big thing of what the heavy progressive income tax does, because if I'm giving 56 cents of every dollar to the government that I earn, all right, one person is working all year round for the government, that two-family unit, a two-unit family, and then what happens also is that the other person still has to give 6%, with all things being equal. So again, who's raising the children at this point? And key bono, who's benefiting from this progressive income tax? The other thing is, folks, you'll understand that Bill Benson, please go on the internet and punch in Bill Benson, the amendment that never was, and you will see that he traveled to every state that supposedly ratified the 16th Amendment and proved conclusively that the 16th Amendment was never properly ratified. And also, let's take a look at some of these dates. All right, Joint House Resolution 192, which we read verbatim on this program, of 1933. All right, the 16th Amendment of 1913. What took place in these 2 years? In 1913, as we've demonstrated to you, the bankers took over the country with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And we got into that quite heavily on other shows. And also, what happens with Joint House Resolution 192 of 1933? Folks, if you remember, that's when the United States government did their amendment with the Trading with the Enemies Act of 1917 to the Trading with the Enemies Act of 1933 and declared the American citizens the enemy of the government. And I know that sounds crazy if you didn't watch a previous show that we had it on. I forget what number it was, but we read that verbatim to you multiple times. How the United States government declared you the enemies of the government. And why is that? Because in 1933, the corporation that you know as the government went insolvent to these very same bankers that took over our money system in 1913 and continue to control it today. This is the reason why. Do you remember that famous quote by Lincoln during the Civil War? I have the Confederate Army in my front door and the international banksters, as he called them, at my back door, and for the future of my nation, it is the bankers I fear the most. Again, folks, because Lincoln understood what was going to happen with the control mechanism of government if it fell into the hands of the private issuance and private currency, which is what we have now. We have a Federal Reserve note. We do not have United States dollars. Okay. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. Now, Americans call this federal and state estate taxes. Folks, when you research this, you're going to understand another thing. This all came in 1916, along with the Social Security Act. Okay, so very, very important. What's taken place here? Okay, what's actually taken place is the fact that basically these private bank has taken over our money system and the halls of Congress, and what they're basically doing is they're coming up with these inheritance or estate taxes now to fulfill the third plank of the Communist Manifesto, Social Security Act of 1936, 1916, but the federal and estate taxes of 1916. And then they reformed probate laws, and they limited inheritancy. But you know what's interesting, folks, is that when you look at all the beautiful people, as they say, the Kennedys and so forth, they have ways to go around this. They put all their property and such in trust, and I'll give you an example of that. Back in the 80s, there was a neighbor of one of the Kennedys, and I forget which one it was, who their dog bit one of their kids, and so of course, you know, the green light went on. Hey, I'm going to sue the Kennedys and make some money. Folks, they couldn't go. The only thing they could go after was the value of the dog, because the dog itself was in a trust. Okay, they couldn't. It was a separate entity from the rest of the trust that the Kennedys had set up. So this is what they do. You know, you and I, we have to pay the fiddler to leave our house to our children, or land to our children, or money to our children, but they have it in trust. So that these trusts are separate entities under the eyes of the law. Again, that's for the beautiful people. Okay, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Americans call this government seizures, tax liens, public law 99-570. That was in 1986. Executive Order 11490, sections 1205 and 202, which gives private land to the Department of Urban Development, the imprisonment of terrorists and those who speak out or write against the government with the 1997 Crime and Terrorist Bill. And also, folks, we got IRS confiscation of property without due process and forfeiture laws that are used by the DEA, IRS, ATF, and a plural of other alphabet soups that will take your property without any due process of law. Now, folks, one thing you got to find interesting, 1997, when you look up the word terrorist, when they define the word terrorist, my wife and I actually qualified for 8 of the 10 definitions of terrorism. We didn't homeschool our children, and we didn't belong to an environmental group, so we didn't qualify for all 10. But we are constitutionalists and so forth, people who actually homeschool your children. You are considered by the Reno administration, during the Clinton administration, you were considered a terrorist. Now, if you remember through the MICA Act, recently we had read some parts of the MICA Act, and they upgraded the definition of terrorist. Gun owners are terrorists, constitutionalists are terrorists, veterans are terrorists, and we read that verbatim to you. So, folks, again, you know, you have to ask yourself, again, the confiscation of their property, and it's happening all the time with regards to all these alphabet soup agencies that come and take our property. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Folks, you know this. If you've been watching this show, we have demonstrated the 5th plank of the Communist Manifesto quite well. You know this as the Federal Reserve banking system. It is a privately owned credit debt system allowed by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. All local banks are members of the Fed system, regulated by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. You know it as the FDIC. And the Federal Reserve Bank uses fiat, paper money, and practices economically destructive fractional reserve banking system. Now let's pick up on this fiat paper money. We had before read to you verbatim what money is and what money is not, what we're supposed to have with money. If you remember with the Coinage Acts of 1792, we were supposed to have, the first one was 1787, we were supposed to literally have 25.8 grains of gold and a 15-to-1 silver ratio of silver to back up our intrinsic value of our money. That's what we had money. We also went to the Black's Law Dictionary and to look up the word note. And when we looked up the word note, we understood that it literally means an acknowledgement of debt. And then when we looked up the word money, we discovered that money does not encompass notes. What does that tell you? That we do not have money, we have legal tender. So it is a fiat paper system, but it is not money. We also have a fractional reserve banking system, which we've gotten into quite well on this show. And about a month ago, we read to you an announcement by Ben Bernanke that we are now going from a 2% fractional banking system to a 0 banking system, fractional banking system. And what that means is this, folks: for every liability, of every dollar liability they have, there's only 2 cents backing that up. Now we're going to 0. There's no more blood in the rock to bleed. So basically, that's what's taking place. And what does the Constitution say about who's supposed to control our money system and the issuance thereof? Obviously, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10 of the American Constitution states that the Congress does as representatives of you and I. Number 6, centralization, of the means of communication and transportation in the hands of the state. Americans call this the Federal Communications Commission and Department of Transportation. This was actually an act that was mandated in 1887, the Commissions Act of 1934, but the big one was the Interstate Commerce Commissions established in 1938. Folks, that's when, through the commerce laws of the Constitution, the federal government, through their phony baloney lawyers, they basically twisted the language of the Commerce Clause of the United States and superseded and encroached state lines through this Interstate Commerce Commission Act in 1938. Again, what happened in the 1930s, the bankers, our corporation, as the government went insolvent, the bankers took this over, and it took them a short 4.5 years to actually break that encroachment. So very, very interesting that you understand that exactly that. It's the centralization of all communications and transportations in the hands of the state. And folks, if you also remember, we haven't gotten into the executive orders quite well. We're going to be doing, within the next couple of weeks, a show on executive orders. But when you start reading executive orders, you will see verbatim that in times of emergency, and we have been in stated times of emergency, literally since 1862, that the executive orders set up all these powers of the federal government to centralize and control all mechanisms of communication and transportations, whether it be land, air, or sea. Okay, so the Federal Aviation Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, here we go, and then some of the executive orders that they mentioned are executive orders 11-490, 1099, as well as state-mandated driver's licenses and Department of Transportation regulations. So, folks, who owns the roads? And what happens is when you are on the roads and you're under their venue of law. Why? Because you went and got a driver's license. You voluntarily went and got a driver's license. You put yourself under their venue, commercial venue of law on the roads. Ask yourself, could you imagine what the founding fathers would have said if you needed a license to travel in this country? What do you think the reaction would have been? Okay? So, that's basically what you're doing. The word license comes from the French law, like I say, and what it basically means is that you are getting permission from an entity which would otherwise be unpermissionable. Okay? You wouldn't be allowed to do it without getting this special license from this entity, whatever it may be, the church, the state, whatever. As a matter of fact, the first license issued to human beings were marriage licenses when people started to marry outside of their race. They got permission from the church to do it. Incredible. So, basically, folks, when you go and get a driver's license, you voluntarily put yourself in a commercial venue of law on a commercial road. And, and that's where they get a lot of the language from. I mean, and, of course, you have to remember the word code is in there, and we described what the word code means a long time ago on this show. But basically, folks, that's what you've done. So are you traveling of free will? Absolutely not. You are traveling at the begets of a centralizing government force that's controlling all the roads in this country. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. the bringing into civilization of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Now, folks, this one you might think, boy, how do they don't control the farms. They don't control agriculture in this country. Really? How about the Department of Agriculture? What do you think they do? They control all of it. They control every mechanism of farming in this country. They control what you do, how you fertilize your land, where you can do it, where you can't do it. They control the markets. They control the transportation to the markets. They control everything. And when you go even deeper with it, you're going to get into the Department of Commerce and Labor, the Department of Interior, the Environmental Protection Agency, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, Bureau of Mines, National Park Services, the IRS. Folks, all these agencies are controlling the farms today, and the family farmer is being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed to almost non-existent. Almost non-existent. Who's controlling the farms are Monsanto and these big conglomerates, who are winning court cases and court cases because of their pollen infiltrating and going on to other farmers' pollinating and destroying crops through genetic modification. And they're winning court cases even though Monsanto's pollen encroached on a private farmer's lands. Incredible. So if you don't think they're controlling the farming industry, go ask your local farmer, if you can find one, who he or she's answering to. And you're going to find it's this really the Department of Agriculture, but there's a whole subsidized list of the Department of Commerce, Labor, Interior, Environmental Protection Agency, all the rest of them. So who's controlling the farming? Number 8, equal liability of all labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Now, very interesting. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, the Federal Public Works Program, and of course, Executive Order 11,000. Folks, if you remember, we're going to do this in a couple of weeks. We're going to get into the executive orders quite well. But Executive Order 11,000, folks, basically forms labor committees and parties. And I don't mean a labor committee like in England where it's a political party. I'm talking about forming units of thousands and or hundreds of American citizens, consolidating them into camps, work camps, and you know them as FEMA camps, and implementing the equal liability of labor through that. It also goes on with the prison systems today. Okay? So, folks, they do control the labor, Department of Employment. I mean, the federal government has a slew of, go up to your boss and ask your boss. I mean the owner, not the manager, the owner. And ask him how many regulations and or taxes and or policies that person has to follow to keep you employed. I think you'll be shocked. I know that when I was self-employed just recently, I was paying 22 different taxes, and I was being told who to hire, who not to hire, who I had to hire, what percentage of my help had to be certain ethnic races and cultures. Okay? So when a business owner does not even have control over his employers, what they have to do, folks, obviously all that cost and all of that inefficiency is placed on the cost and the product itself. So if you may think you're self-employed, but you've got a bunch of silent partners behind you with a gun at your head telling you this is how you're going to mandate your business. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere from the EPA to the IRS. It's everywhere from the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce. It doesn't matter. OSHA. There's a whole plateau of them that the average person in business has to follow. And it's either do business their way or you're not in business. Is that a laissez-faire economy? Not at all. Okay. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country, and by more equitable distribution of population over the country. You know this, folks. It's a Planning Reorganization Act of 1949 through Title 17. All right? The super corporate farms, as well as executive orders 11,647 and 11,731. Folks, what that does is put the United States into 10 districts and or regions. Remember we got into that at one show? how the Constitution says the federal government's only supposed to be involved in territories, districts, and enclaves, as in the District of Columbia. Okay, not supposed to be involved in the states. So what did the federal government do? They made us into 10 districts, changed the language. They no longer recognize state borders, and they tore down the border through a play on words and a stroke of the pen, the border that stopped them from doing business and physically having their agents and policies inside the Union, the 50 states that make up the Union. Okay. And of course, the gradual abolition of distinction between town and country and national boundaries. Folks, can you say the North American Union? This is why what's going on down in Arizona and so forth. You notice this thing in Arizona, how they keep talking about how this is a prejudice towards the Mexican people. They never speak about the conditions that are going down there at the border. You know, I was reading in the Caledonia Record, which is a local newspaper here in Vermont, just 5 days ago, how Mexican soldiers actually went over the border into the United States, shooting at Border Patrol agents until the Border Patrol retreated from their position. Now, if that happened on the border of North and South Korea, we'd have the entire army, the United States Army would be at war right now with North Korea. We can keep between 28 and 32,000 troops on the North Korean border since 1952, but we can't keep 4,000 troops on our border to protect our border. The reason why, folks, is because the executive branch and the Congress are following the orders of the North American Union. Please look up the North American Union on your computer, and also look up the Transcontinental Highway. I think you'll be shocked at the plans that are already laid out. Okay. And then, folks, finally, free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor laws in its present form, and combination of education with industrial production. Folks, first of all, free education. There's nothing free. We all know that. And since 1964, when the United States government got into and involved in public education, out of the 32 industrial nations, we are now 28th in overall efficiency of our students. And the sad thing is, folks, we're number one in cost. So, someone said to me, well, basically, I said to them that, this plan is exactly what the federal government wanted. And they said, Tom, how can you mean that? The kids can't even count change today. They don't even know their basic history. They have no foundation of their culture. And I said, exactly. That is exactly what the federal government got involved in education for. It's not an education system, folks. It's an indoctrination system. I know when I was self-employed, as I spoke of earlier, when a young person came in and I read homeschooled, I hired. You know why? They could do math. They could think on their feet. They understood a reasoning process to come to a conclusion of a problem. Okay? Kids today, they can't count change without that figure being placed in front of them. They have no understanding of the heritage of this country. They have no understanding of the foundation of law, what type of system we're supposed to be under. And of course, if you don't have a foundation of where you've been, you can be directed to go down any road you want in the future. You have to read the book by Charlotte Iserbyt, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. She was a Undersecretary of Education during the Reagan administration. And basically what she did was she kept all of the UN documents that came through her office and put them in a book. And folks, the title of the book is correct. The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. What the education system is doing to our children is deliberately what the desired outcome that the government wants. Now, another thing that may shock you is that your education system is run by an organization called the NEA, but when you go beyond the NEA, you're going to find an organization called UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. That's who is running your school system. That's who is running the criteria of the textbooks. For instance, the state of Texas this year, no longer has any mention of Thomas Jefferson in their textbooks. No more. They don't even mention him or his writings. What are they trying to take away, folks? Thomas Jefferson obviously believed in the rights and liberties of man to a natural God, or God, the Creator, as he called him. The textbooks today, through the division of the family, have the children being obedient and subservient to the state. And the family structure in this country is being destroyed. As I said earlier, 1998 was the first year that there were more filings for divorce than there were for marriages in this country. Very, very sad statement. Look what happens. If you have legitimate children and you have a mother and father living in a house, you can't get benefits. But have what's called an illegitimate children, where you got a single mother and no father in that house, you can have all the children you want because you'll be receiving all the benefits you want. Why? Why do you think that is? You think that's just happen chance that happens? No, that's been thought out methodically to destroy the family, the structure of the family unit. And that's the reason why. So folks, you have to ask yourself, you have to look in the mirror after reading this stuff. You know, you got the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, and you got the Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. You have to really ask yourself, okay, you know, what system are we really under? You know, get outside the conditioning that has been set upon you since the days of elementary school, since the days you started watching your television, and objectively look in the mirror and look at these two systems and tell me which one do you think we are currently living under. Make your own conclusions with that. But whatever conclusions you come to, realize that these conditions are upon you because of your apathy, because the American people have allowed this to happen. We can make a change with this, but we have to understand the system that we are entangled with and which is being levied upon us. If you don't know what you're fighting, you're not in the fight. So, with that being said, folks, we thank you very, very much for watching our program. We know that they keep you extremely busy. After all, we're all the proverbial rat in the proverbial wheel. We thank you for watching. We ask you to review this information in your head. Go out and do some more research upon yourself. Read the Communist Manifesto by Engels and Marx. Read the Constitution of the United States and determine what system you are currently living under. And then ask yourself why and who, and cui bono, who benefited. As always, folks, thank you for watching, and we remind you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you.